I'm Adam in Wales, and today we're going to be looking at my top 10 games which have won the Spiel des Jahres award. Now, in July 2016, the new Spiel des Jahres award is going to be announced, and it's going to be either Imhotep or Codenames or Karuba that wins the award. So today we're looking back at other games that have won the award over the years, and specifically my favourite 10 of those games. So let's make a start. Kingdom Builder was the first game by Donald X. Vaccarino to follow Dominion, and as such it had a great degree of expectation because his previous game Dominion was such a big hit, and in fact you're going to see that later on in this list. So Kingdom Builder came out with this big fanfare, and it really divided opinion because it was a very, very different game. This game, if anything, it feels like it's inspired by something like Rainer Knizia's Through the Desert, that game where you lay out camels in sort of trails around the board. But this game mixes in a whole load of sort of variants, really. There's different scoring conditions in every game. The map is different in every game. There's different powers and abilities available in every game. And yet the gameplay itself is fairly dry. It's essentially a puzzle. Sometimes you get in other players' way, and it's a game that has a hefty dose of randomness in it. And so sometimes you can be a bit messed up by the card draw. No more so than in a classic game like Carcassonne or something like that. But I think some of those games knocked it for a lot of players. They weren't entirely happy with that stuff. Personally, I've found I've got a lot of enjoyment out of this game. I've enjoyed adding in the expansions, and I found it has stood the test of time. I don't think it's up there with the top tier of Spiel des Jahres winners, and it's perhaps a little bit too complex for a first time sort of gateway game. It's not as simple as something like Carcassonne, but there is a place for it. It's a sort of next step to those gateway games. It looks lovely when it's laid out. It's only a short game, and there is a lot of variety in this box. In Kingdom Builder, each player begins their turn by drawing a card. This card dictates the terrain type the player can utilise that turn, either grass, flowers, forest, canyons or desert. The player must place 3 of their settlements onto the board, strictly placing adjacent to their own existing settlements and sticking to the terrain type shown on the card. Only if there is no adjacent location on the specified terrain type may a player place their settlement in another part of the board. Placing next to special locations gives players special rule-breaking abilities, which are different in every game. Even more variety is provided by the variable scoring conditions, which change from game to game. In one game, for example, players may score by building next to water. In another, they're going to be building the largest clusters of adjacent settlements, or alternatively, they might be attempting to join various locations with chains of settlements. When one player runs out of settlements in their supply, the game ends, and the player with the highest score wins. Qwirkle is it takes Scrabble and it does away with the letters, let's put it that way. The rules are exactly the same as Scrabble, really. You're laying down tiles and trying to score rows, and you can add to existing rows, but instead of using letters and trying to make words, we're matching colours and we're matching shapes. It's an ingenious idea, very, very simple. This really is a family game. You could imagine this having been around for generations and sitting on the shelves in Toys R Us alongside all those mass market board games. But that's not to do it down, because it is fun, it is strategic, and you know, there's nothing foolish or simple or old-fashioned about this game or outdated about it. It plays well as a classic, accessible, abstract game. In Qwirkle, each player has 6 tiles which are kept secret from the other players. On their turn, they add 1 or more blocks to the communal grid and draw new tiles from a bag. The tiles which are added to the grid must match the same characteristic as the tiles already present, either creating a line consisting of a single colour or of a single shape. The player scores 1 point for each tile in the line, including the tiles already in play. This is reminiscent of the scoring in Scrabble. With clever placement, players can even score 2 lines at once. An identical tile can never feature in a line more than once, so the maximum line length is 6 tiles. And completing a line of 6 tiles is called a Qwirkle. It scores double points. The game ends when all the tiles are used and the highest scorer wins. Camel Up was the surprise winner in 2014. I say surprise because it was up against Splendor, which is an obvious sort of, it felt like a shoo-in for the award, really. Splendor has just been this mega hit. But where Splendor is a fairly dry sort of exercise, it's good, it's a good, solid game, and it would have been a worthy winner in itself, but what it doesn't have is the excitement of the races that you get in Camel Up. Camel Up had that sort of toy factor, that cardboard pyramid, so people looked at it as a little bit frivolous. It kind of, it wasn't a well-known game, and it felt like a sort of child's game, but once you start playing it and you watch those racing camels and you back one of them and you see it make this miraculous comeback as it crosses the finish line and nets you all the points, those moments are rare in gaming, and it is one of those games where you'll stand up and shout, yeah, yes! You know, your camels just won the race and netted you all the points. I think it's a fantastic game. It's accessible. It's easy to teach. It's essentially a gambling game, but who cares? It's great fun. Family game. The theme is funny. Those pyramids of camels, they're stacking on top of each other as they go around the track. Fantastic game. Camel Up. It's making me laugh just thinking about it. In Camel Up, players bet on the results of a weird Egyptian camel race. The race comprises of several legs. At the end of each leg of the race, players score points based on the accuracy of their predictions. When a camel crosses the finish line, the game ends, and a final scoring round occurs, and the highest points wins. On a player's turn, they may do one of 4 things. The first option is to bet on a camel to win the current leg. The second option is to bet on the overall winner or loser of the entire race. The third option is to move a camel by tipping a coloured dice from the pyramid contraption. The final choice is to manipulate the race using a desert tile, which changes the camel's progress. When camels move onto the same space as camels which are already present, they climb on top. And if a camel lower in the stack moves again, they will take the camels stacked above them along for the ride. Thus, even the camels in last place have scope for exciting last-minute bursts towards the finish line. Number 7 on my list goes back to 1983. Now, this is a game that I played a lot as a child. And I didn't realise at the time that I was playing anything other than a mass market game to sit alongside Monopoly and all the rest. But what I was actually playing is a sophisticated Euro. This is the original deduction game, the all the players against one, many against one sort of game where you've got one spy, not hidden identity, but hidden location, travelling around this map of London, and you can only see what forms of transport he's used, and you have to kind of track him using that. It's fantastic, really simple, really easy to teach. Like I said with Camel Up, exciting moments where if you're Mr. X, you're the guy hiding in the shadows, those moments where you just sneak through and run away, and the other guys, they could have got you but they didn't. They're sort of, you know, heart-stopping moments in this game. It's been later developed into also, I mean, to be fair, it's created a genre, really. So you've got games like Fury of Dracula and Letters from Whitechapel, which in my view bloat the system. They take what is lovely and pure and brilliant about Scotland Yard and they make it into this big convoluted extra long thing. I don't need any of that. I need a map of London, I need an underground, a train, a bus, and just see the tickets and try and, as Mr. X I'm trying to get away, or as the detectives I'm trying to catch him. I think it's a fantastic game. Scotland Yard stands up amongst today's modern Spiel des Jahres winners. In Scotland Yard, one player takes on the role of Mr. X and the other players hunt him playing detectives. Mr. X moves around the map of London, writing his location secretly each turn on his own logbook. He doesn't give his location, but he does indicate his mode of transport. So other players can deduce his approximate whereabouts, particularly because every 5 turns, Mr. X has to reveal his current whereabouts. If any other player ever lands on the current location of Mr. X, the game ends and the detectives win. If the detectives run out of movement options, or after 22 complete turns without catching Mr. X, the game also ends. In this case, Mr. X wins. 2006, Thurn Taxis wins the award. Now this is 2 years after Ticket to Ride, and it's a similar sort of game, and I think ultimately Thurn Taxis loses out because Ticket to Ride does a lot of what Thurn Taxis does, and it does it in a slightly simpler, slightly more accessible and slightly more attractive way. That's not to say Thurn Taxis is a bad game. I think it's a brilliant game, and actually I think if you're interested in that sort of game, this is a good next step from Ticket to Ride. But the theme is dry. It's about developing post offices, a system of post offices around Germany, and essentially you're laying houses on the board and trying to create a network of these houses to gather points. The rule set is simple, but there's a couple more bits to it than there is in something like Ticket to Ride. It's had a couple of expansions, as most of the Spiel des Jahres have. The first expansion was excellent. I think it's Power and Glory. The second expansion, All Roads Lead to Rome, not so good. And it's kind of been forgotten, which is a shame. I think it's a great game. I think it's well worth looking at again. In Thurn Taxis, players are each attempting to build a postal system in Germany. In doing so, they collect bonus tiles and valuable carriages, which will all translate into points at the end of the game. On a player's turn, they must add a city card to their hand relating to a location on the board. They must also play a city card, adding to a so-called route, a network of adjoining cities. In addition, they may choose to take a second city card, or play a second card, or clear the selection of cards on display. If the player wishes, they may score the route they've been building, and in this case, the player may place one post office onto all cities in their route of a single colour, or place one post office onto a single city of each colour in their route. Bonus tiles are awarded for completely filling certain regions of the board with post offices, and carriages are awarded for creating long routes. When one player completes a route of 7 cities, or when one player runs out of post offices in their supply, the game ends, and the highest points wins. Number 5, Tikal. Oh, this is a good one. This is one of a trilogy of games, the Mask trilogy, along with a game called Java and a game called Mexica. Actually, I prefer Java to Tikal, but Java didn't win the Spiel des Jahres. So I'm talking about Tikal today, and it is a fantastic game. It won in 1999. Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling, they're a brilliant team. And this is a Euro game that was around before Euro games really existed. 1999 is just starting, and what a start. This is a beautiful game, a game that really evokes that sense of exploration as we lay out tiles, as we explore a jungle and we find these little temples, and it's an area control game, really. We're trying to claim dominance over these temples and then score them later. Stunning to look at, really sort of interactive game, getting in each other's way, that nice sense of, as I say, of that exploration. Lovely game, Tikal. In Tikal, players excavate the jungles of Guatemala, receiving points for recovering treasures and controlling temple sites. On their turn, the player places a new hex tile on the board, covering a selection of the jungle, and then uses 10 action points to explore. Action points can be used to move, to uncover temples, to create camps, and to recover treasures. Uncovering temples makes them more valuable, and players score for these temples if they have more workers in that tile than the other players. Sets of matching treasures also score points. After 4 scoring rounds, the player with the most points wins. Number 4, and what is there to say about Carcassonne that hasn't already been said? This is the tile laying game. This is the entry point into the modern board gaming world. For many, many people, it was certainly my first entry point into the hobby. This box, it's been reworked recently, but it still looks very similar, and it's starting to even look a little bit old hat. But the game itself, I mean, this is the game that introduced meeples. It really is iconic in our board gaming world. It's simple enough to teach to practically anybody. There's a kids version if people that are too young to play this version. In fact, there's a load of different genre versions of Carcassonne. Star Wars Carcassonne. Basically, there's a version for anybody. There's 2-player Carcassonne in Carcassonne the Castle. There's the South Seas version, the Gold Rush version. All manner of different games. This has become an industry in itself. And it's not overrated. It's a fantastic game, and you know it deserves its place in the history of board gaming. In Carcassonne, players build a communal map of the French region by placing tiles on the table representing cities, roads, and fields. On a player's turn, they add a single tile to the map, lining up matching terrain types. They may also place a wooden person onto the tile they've just placed. This game introduced the term meeple to describe these tokens. If the meeple is placed onto a road, it will score points for the player when the road is completed, i.e. blocked by a junction at each end. If the meeple is placed on a city, it's going to score points when all the city walls are joined up. If placed on a cloister, it scores for being completely surrounded with tiles. Finally, if placed on a field, it scores at the end of the game for being close to cities. Players can manipulate the growing board throughout the game to muscle in on other players' scoring opportunities. And when all tiles have been placed, the player with the most points wins. You can't really talk about Carcassonne without thinking about Ticket to Ride, because really these are the two most significant games as gateway games into our hobby, along with perhaps Settlers of Catan. These three have introduced more people to gaming than any other game, and they're, well, I'm not a big fan of Settlers, I've got to admit, but Carcassonne and Ticket to Ride, stunning, stunning games. This game is It's so ingenious, the fact that you can explain the rules on a single rule sheet, and yet this is a meaty game. It takes an hour or so to play. Maybe that's slightly overdoing it, but we've got a nice big board. It looks like a board game. It looks like a board game in the eyes of people who don't play modern board games. This is what they think a board game is. It's a worthy successor to those old-fashioned, outdated classics like Monopoly and Cluedo and all that sort of thing. Forget them, move on to Ticket to Ride. This is where it starts. Okay, a Ticket to Ride, mine is the 10th anniversary edition, 10 years of Ticket to Ride. Is a beautiful production, this particular version, very expensive, but you can get many different versions of Ticket to Ride. A bit like I said with Carcassonne, you've got 2-player maps, you've got 3-player maps, you've got really sort of tight, nasty, mean little maps, you've got ones that are much easier going, you've got ones with nice little rules variants. There's so many different ways to play Ticket to Ride. I haven't explored hardly any of them. And I love it, and I'm looking forward to playing more of it. And you know, that's 10 years on. In Ticket to Ride, players place chains of plastic trains onto a board to connect cities and score objective cards held secret from other players. On a player's turn, they may take 2 cards from the supply or play a set of matching cards from their hand, allowing them to place trains onto the board and scoring points for the length of that route. The third option is to draw further secret objectives from the deck. When a player has played a set number of trains, then the game ends, and players score points for secret objectives they've fulfilled, and they lose points for unfulfilled objectives. The highest score wins. Number 2 and number 1 on this list are among my very favourite games of all time. Dominion was an absolute turning point in the hobby. This was the creation of deck building games by Donald X. Vaccarino, who also made Kingdom Builder. This was the precursor to Kingdom Builder, and it was so successful that that's why Kingdom Builder, I think, upset so many people, because they were expecting another Dominion. And what we've had, instead of just having another Dominion, we've had hundreds more Dominions, and they've never been quite as good, in my view. I know that's controversial. I think Dominion is essentially themeless. We've got this sort of medieval sort of look to it, but really this is a simple card game, and yet there's so much variety in this box. What other deck builders have done is taken Dominion and added a whole load of theme into it, constantly trying to make a story out of something which is essentially an abstract sort of mechanism. It works for a lot of players, so I'm very, very happy for them. But personally, I can just appreciate the ingenuity of the different card interactions and that sort of thing. And the fact that they're still producing expansions now when there's already so much content for it just shows the endless imagination of Donald X. Vaccarino in creating these different cards. It's a shame he's never quite managed to recreate the success of Dominion with any of his other games. But if this is all he ever creates, then he's done a service to the board game world. Dominion, absolute masterpiece. In Dominion, each player starts with a small deck of cards which belongs only to them. They're going to try and add point scoring cards to this deck throughout the game. The player's initial deck has some coins in it and a few victory point cards. The player draws 5 cards from their own deck, and this will offer them income to spend on new cards to add to the deck. They may choose to purchase more valuable money cards like silver or gold, or they might buy victory point cards or special action cards which will give them better and better abilities throughout the game. Whatever happens, all cards used are placed into a player's own personal discard pile. And when their deck runs out, the player's discard pile is shuffled and it becomes their new deck. Hence, cards never actually are spent, not even the money cards. The player's deck just gets bigger throughout the game, and these abilities and their spending power just gets better and better. Each game has a completely different set of cards available to purchase, so the strategy in the game is all about spotting card combinations to utilise. Ultimately, when the so-called province cards are taken, the game ends and players count up all the points in their deck. The highest scorer wins. Number 1, Dixit. My copy is Dixit Odyssey, which is the 12-player version, but I've got the original Dixit. I've got all the different expansions for Dixit. Oh my word, this is my number 2 game of all time. I absolutely love Dixit. It is the artistry that has gone into this game, the beautiful images, the beautiful artwork, the way it manages to sort of gently encourage players to be creative and imaginative, but it's not actually too taxing. It's not like we have to tell stories. It's not like we have to come up with anything ingenious, but we do have to just unlock our imaginations a little bit to get into this game. I've seen it turn off some players who struggle with that, strategic players or players who are a little self-conscious, but when it works, oh my word, it's a sublime experience. It's a lovely insight into people's minds, and yet everything in this box is so gentle. The images are lovely. There's a little bit of just a delicious little dark edge, a dark fairy tale sort of edge to some of the cards. But this is a game you can play with small children. They'll get it. You can play it with families. You can play it as an after-dinner game with adults. You can adapt the length of the game. I've played this as a sort of 10-minute game. Everyone have a quick go, or I've played it as a much longer game. I've rarely met people who don't like the game outside of those groups that I've mentioned previously, the sort of strategy gamers and the people who perhaps are a little shyer or lack the confidence with this sort of creative stuff. But Dixit, I think it's stunning. I think if this was as a board, if I want to show people what the board game world is capable of, and why I love it so much, and why it's worthy as an art form, it's not just some geeky little hobby that you can hide away and play, but not accessible for the masses. Dixit is the game that's going to convert people. Dixit is a creative party game using beautiful dreamlike images. On a player's turn, they give a title to one of the cards in their hand, and they place it unseen to the other players onto the table, announcing the title. The other players then select a card from their own hand which could have the same title, and they place that card face down onto the table too. These cards are all shuffled and then they're revealed. Players then vote on which card they think belongs to the original title giver. The tricky bit here is that if everyone guesses the correct card, the title giver scores no points, so they can't afford to make the title too obvious. But if no one guesses the correct card, the title giver also scores no points, so they can't afford to make their title too difficult to guess. So the title giver each turn is actually trying to give a slightly vague title, which some players might interpret and guess correctly, but others will not. So that's my top 10 winners of the Spiel des Jahres award. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked my video, please watch my others, or subscribe to my YouTube channel, or follow me on Twitter @BoardGameWales, and on Board Game Geek I'm Adam78. Thank you very much for watching. All the best.